All right, we are back here on the podcast, getting ready to talk some New York Jets football as they are getting ready for a very pivotal season in franchise history, trying to snap the 13-year playoff drought. Joining me today, great friend of the podcast. He's the host of the Locked On Jets podcast. John Butchko is back with us. John, welcome. How are you?
Mike, it's great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here as well here, and obviously very busy offseason for the Jets. They make some big name pickups here. They have a pivotal first round draft pick here to make some big trades. Leave out what the Jets did in the offseason.
I think they did what they should have done in 2023. In 2023, they made the trade for Aaron Rodgers, and I almost had the sense from the Jets that they thought that was all they needed to do to go to the Super Bowl. And obviously, we know what happened last year with Aaron Rodgers getting injured, but I think in many ways, the Rodgers injury kind of obscured how poorly they did in building certain key components of their roster, because I think it became very convenient to blame Zach Wilson for all of the problems they had on offense. And don't get me wrong, Zach Wilson, is at this point in time is not a quality NFL quarterback. He probably never will be a quality NFL quarterback. But if you watch that team last year, it was clear that even if Aaron Rodgers was playing, the offense would have been better. There's no question. The offense would have been a lot better. And I'm not suggesting the offense would have been anywhere near as bad. Your quarterback's the most important position on the field, but the Jets had fundamental issues on their offensive line last year. They had fundamental issues at their skill positions. And this time a year ago, I was really confused as to why they did not do more to upgrade those spots. They entered last year. Allen Lazard was their number 2 receiver. Now, even as somebody who was not a big Lazard fan when the Jets signed him, I wasn't expecting him to be as bad as he was. That said, Allen Lazard as your number 2 receiver is not a good situation. I mean, a year ago they were rolling with their starting tackles, 38-year-old Dwayne Brown, who had an excellent career. Total respect to Dwayne Brown, a guy who made many Pro Bowls during his prime in Houston and Seattle, but was 38 years old and coming off a serious injury. On the other side, you had Mekhi Becton, who hadn't played in 2 years, so you had no idea what you were getting out of him. And these are really key spots just neglected a year ago. And again, it was almost as though they thought, if we get Aaron Rodgers, we're set. Well, obviously the injury happened, but they weren't the team that would have had a tough time. I think that team would have had a tough time making the playoffs last year. So this year, they addressed the areas where they needed to address. They bring in Mike Williams, who I think is not only an excellent number 2 receiver, but to the extent Garrett Wilson lacks certain skills. And I love Garrett Wilson. I think he's a great receiver. There are certain things he does not bring to the table. He's not overly big. Sometimes when he struggles, it's against some of the more physical corners who can press him at the line of scrimmage. He's not much of a downfield threat. He's not much of a contested catch guy. Those are things Mike Williams brings to the table. On the offensive line, they traded to get Morgan Moses back. That corrects one of the biggest mistakes that have made over the last couple of years, because Morgan Moses was really solid for them in 2021, and they let him go to Baltimore after that season. And they've had issues on the offensive line ever since. And more than anything, Morgan Moses is very durable. He missed a couple of games last year with an injury, but Morgan Moses barely ever misses a game. In the last couple of years, the Jets have been decimated by injuries on their offensive line. And then obviously signing Tyron Smith, which, is a move that's, Tyron Smith's a great tackle. He could be going to the Hall of Fame. He's one of the best tackles of his generation. And then they Luciano to kind of back Smith up, and he'll take over the starting left tackle in 2025. So I think you look at this offseason, on paper, they've done a lot to fix the issues on the offense. They didn't, and again, I think on paper, I think what they did was they made the moves that they should have made a year ago.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that here. I want to start obviously with the big question with Aaron Rodgers here. Obviously, plays just 4 snaps last year. He's out for the year with the Achilles injury. How has he looked in camp so far?
By all accounts, pretty good. He played very well, and the Jets have a scrimmage the weekend before the first preseason game, and by all accounts, he looked very good in that scrimmage. The Jets tell us everything's on track. You don't really know until you see the guy play in a real game. I think Rodgers is not going to be the same player he was in Green Bay, and I mean that stylistically, because even before the injury, you could see near the end of his Green Bay career, he wasn't as mobile. And I've always felt like one of the things that set Rodgers apart from mortal quarterbacks was his ability to throw on the run. He he's not a guy who's going to rush for 1,000 yards. He's not a guy who's going to put up big rushing stats. But his ability to extend plays with his legs, his ability to throw, throw accurate passes down the field on the run was one of the things that always set him apart. This is a point in Rodgers' career where, especially after the Achilles injury, which, more than anything for a 40-year-old is going to take away some of your mobility. Rodgers is going to have to play from the pocket more than he ever has in the past. He's going to have to kind of go into more of like a Tom Brady type mode where Brady, played his whole career. And, when Brady moved into the pocket, it was like a subtle step up or a subtle step to the side. I think the other thing that will benefit the Jets is, the moves I mentioned that they made on the offensive line, which, if your quarterback's not super mobile, which I don't expect Rodgers to be, you really need to protect him. And I think this offensive line on paper looks pretty solid. So a long way of saying, so far Rodgers looks pretty good. We'll see how we get when we get to the season. But I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. And the thing is, Rodgers is 40 years old, again, coming off a serious injury. I think it's fair to expect some degree of decline. But even like Aaron Rodgers, who was 85% as good as he used to be, that's an enormous upgrade from what the Jets have had at the quarterback position in a really long time.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously the other lingering question in camp right now is this Haason Reddick holdout here. They bring him in via trade to replace Bryce Huff, who goes to the Eagles here. There is a thought that the Jets had that basically he's going to show up. He wants a new deal, but he's going to come to camp and he's going to work it out there. He's not shown up yet. They fined him over $500,000 at this point here. When's the point of concern for the Jets that Reddick is not here yet?
I think it's week one. I think that there's still I did not think he'd hold out, but Reddick still has every incentive to come out and play. He's got a salary for over $14 million this year that he's forfeiting if he doesn't go out and play. And he comes to the Jets, and the Jets don't give him a new contract. Well, the only way to get a new contract is to play really well this season. Now, I think there are certainly fair questions to be asked about how it got to this point. I think it would be fair to say, based on what we know, that the Jets kind of mishandled the situation. I've never heard of a team trade for a player and then the player immediately hold out. I've never heard of a situation where you don't settle the contract at the time of the trade. And you have to remember, the Jets did not trade a pick this year. It's not like they were on the clock and it's like, we either need to trade this pick now or we can't do the deal. They traded a pick 2026, 2 years down the line for Haason Reddick. So they had every opportunity to wait. This trade did not need to be done at the minute they made it. They could have waited to make sure the contract situation was in place. And I know that the Jets, whenever the Jets are in a situation like this, they float some rumor to some friendly reporter that they didn't really, this isn't really their fault. And I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not their fault, but I've never seen a situation like this before. So I think the Jets, based on what we know, I think the Jets deserve a degree of criticism for this. I think the good news though is that there's still every reason to believe that Haason Reddick's going to be there for week one. Now, if he misses the full training camp, maybe you keep him on a pitch count week one, week two, just because, players who sit out training camp might be more susceptible to soft tissue injuries. If you go back to 2010, Darrelle Revis held out at all of training camp and then, had a hamstring injury the second week of the season. So, you may have to reduce his snap counts just to keep him healthy the first couple of weeks. But I still think the odds are in favor of Haason Reddick playing and playing well.
Yeah, that's for sure here. Obviously, a couple of headlines to watch the Jets in camp here is the offensive line I mentioned earlier here was a disaster the last year. It was a disaster the last few years under Joe Douglas. They put a lot of resources into it. Tyron Smith is here. They bring in the two guys from Baltimore. They draft Olu Fashanu for round one here. Is it fair to say right now this looks like, on paper, the best line that Douglas has put together in his Jets tenure?
So that's a really low bar to clear, but I think yes. On paper is the operative phrase. You look back at Joe Douglas's first draft pick with the Jets was drafting Mekhi Becton. He picked him over Tristan Wirfs, and I remember even at the time I said, this is a swing for the fences because I think everybody knew Wirfs was going to be really good. Now I don't know if we knew how good. I don't think we thought Wirfs would be this good, but everybody knew Wirfs was going to be a really good tackle. Becton was the swing for the fences. You knew it could go either way with him, and obviously you couldn't have predicted the injuries, but to have had such a safe pick in front of you and passed it up to try and hit the grand slam because Becton's size before the injury, his movement skills were there. He didn't have all the technique you were looking for, and it just kind of set the tone for Douglas's inability to put together a good offensive line. Douglas's predecessor Mike McCagnon really made no effort to build a good offensive line. In his 5 years, he drafted, I think, the highest draft pick he ever used on an offensive line was a 3rd round pick. Joe Douglas has made an effort. He's invested a lot in the offensive line. He just hasn't been very good at it so far. So hopefully this next shot at it will produce results for the Jets. You got a guy in Tyron Smith who's, again, borderline Hall of Famer, and some people may say you could take the borderline off that statement. Morgan Moses is a really solid tackle. Elijah Vera Tucker, if he can stay healthy, is a very good guard, and that's part of it. Is I think to be fair, just Douglas made a lot of mistakes, but he's also had his share of bad luck. Vera Tucker getting injured back-to-back seasons on what really were fluke injuries, was something that was kind of the pivotal moment both years for the Jets offensive line falling apart. You can kind of do a before and after of how the Jets offensive line looked pre-Vera Tucker injury and post-Vera Tucker injury in 22 and 23. Yeah, I think that on paper this line looks very good, and it's not a particularly high bar to clear, but this is an offensive line that should protect Aaron Rodgers, and also, it should open holes for Breece Hall. Breece Hall almost ran for 1,000 yards last year behind what the Jets were putting on the field, and this year he's going to actually have a line that can open holes for him if everybody stays healthy and everybody plays as well as they can.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, one of the other areas in the offense you're watching closely in camp, you feel like, is the battle at receiver, obviously, because Mike Williams not back on the practice field yet. We know that guys like Xavier Gibson not really taking the field here. You're getting a lot of reps for guys like Malachi Corley, Jason Brownlee, Alan Lazard. What do you think of the state of the Jets' weapons behind Garrett Wilson right now?
I think if you take Mike Williams off the field, it gets kind of shady. It looks like the group did last year. I know you have Malachi Corley, but I think expectations for Corley are probably too high among the fan base in general at this point. This is a guy who really, it's not so much he had a limited route tree in college, that he had almost no route tree in college. And Aaron Rodgers is pretty famous for being tough on rookie receivers, because Aaron Rodgers, when it comes to being on the football field, Aaron Rodgers is a genius, and Aaron Rodgers wants the receivers to always be in the right place. And these routes in the NFL are so precise. It's like at 3 seconds exactly, you have to be at this spot. If you're a yard away, you've messed up the route. You've thrown off the timing for everything. So, Corley they'll manufacture touches for him. They'll throw him a lot of screens, which is how he produced the bulk of his yardage in college. Look, Jets fans aren't going to like this answer, but I think right now Lazard's going to play a bigger role in the offense that people want. I think that as a number 3 receiver, he should be fine. That's kind of like the level he played at in Green Bay. Now that's not worth $11 million the Jets are paying him per year. But I don't think Lazard's as bad as he was last year. And if Lazard comes out and has a decent season this year, people will point to Aaron Rodgers. They'll say, "Oh, it's all Aaron Rodgers." Aaron, and it's to an extent that's true, because Aaron Rodgers will find Lazard when his route takes him to the hole in the zone, and Lazard's numbers will be better. Lazard's not a great. I don't know that Lazard brings any plus attributes to the table. He's big, but he doesn't impose his will on anybody. He's not a guy who makes a lot of contested catches. He's not a guy who boxes out or out physicals, smaller corners. He's not a guy with strong hands at the catch points, but he's also not the drop machine he was last year. And the drops, I think the drops just kind of snowballed on him. And I don't think Lazard's a very good receiver. I think this time last year, Jets fans were drastically overrating Lazard. Now I feel like they're actually underrating him a little bit, because while he doesn't bring a lot to the table, he's also not the guy who just looked like a sub NFL receiver a year ago.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely will help Lazard. We'll be having his quarterback back, a little lesser role here. And a couple of camp-related questions, obviously, here. Who are some early standouts that you've noticed in camp that you guys feel like the Jet fans should keep an eye on over the course of the preseason?
Oh, that's a good question. Xavier Gibson got injured, but he's the guy who the Jets were pretty high on him during the off-season program. Now that can go either way, and this coaching staff frequently misrepresent how good guys are going to be. But that was a name you kept hearing during the course of the off-season program. Then he got injured early in training camp. A guy who's kind of under the radar right now is Michael Clemens. When the Jets traded John Franklin Myers, a lot of people including myself, expected that Will McDonald would step into the number 3 defensive end role, and I still think that will happen. But there have been reports that Clemens is seeing a lot of work with the first team defense, so maybe that's something to watch. Another guy who is really impressing people is Jamie Sherwood, he's a part-time player. He's the number 3 linebacker behind C.J. Mosley and Quincy Williams. But he's an interesting guy. The Jets drafted him back in 2021. He's a safety. They moved him to linebacker, and part of that deals with the defensive philosophy where the Jets like to put a lot of speed on their defense, especially their back seven. And safeties are faster than linebackers, so you draft a safety, you convert him to a linebacker, you improve your speed at that position. Sherwood's the guy whose name just keeps coming up over and over.
Yeah, definitely interesting to watch some of those guys here. And we know we talked about receiver already in terms of like camp battles here. Like, what position battles are you watching? I feel like another one I would keep an eye on is backup running back behind Breece Hall.
Yeah, that's a good one. Braylon Allen, the rookie out of Wisconsin, another guy who seems to be turning heads. We'll see. Again, look, the Jets coaching staff sometimes tells you guys are going to be great, and then we get to the season and they're not so great. It's interesting. The Jets don't have a ton of position battles. Like you mentioned, we talked about wide receiver. I think maybe the one true position battle they've got is safety, where you're going to have like 3 guys competing for 2 spots. You've got Chuck Clark, who it was kind of an under the radar trade last year. Chuck Clark is kind of the odd man out in Baltimore because the Ravens were so good at safety. They didn't really have space for him. So the Jets traded a 7th round pick for him. I thought it was a really good trade in 2023, and then suffered a season-ending injury during the offseason. So they just didn't really get to see him last year. He's in the mix. Tony Adams and the incumbent starters in the mix, and then Ashton Davis, who stepped up in a role last year. He was a role player last year. He's also a good special teamer. You have those 3 guys competing for 2 spots at safety, and I say that with the caveat: the Jets are going to throw out their share of 3 safety looks. So all 3 of these guys will get playing time. I think the question is more, which are the 2 guys who are full-timers and which guy's a part-timer?
Yeah, that's true. My last question is, obviously, we all know that, Woody Johnson won't say it. There's a playoff mandate this year. Aaron Rodgers, I know, has said, like, if I don't perform, we're all gone next year here. My question is more of, like, do you feel like if they get off to a slow start in the season, knowing what's on the line here, do you think that there is something drastic happening? Whether it's a coaching change, whether it's guys getting benched, like, what do you think the desperation level is for the Jets in season? They don't get off to a quick start. Their schedule should be favorable for them in the early going.
Yeah, in the Woody Johnson era, there has never been a coach fired in season. And now Woody Johnson wasn't technically running the team at this point, but that was true even the ridiculous Adam Gase year in 2020. So, I mean, look, this is the crew they've got. If we're going to be honest, I think the only reason Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are still here is that Aaron Rodgers is around, because it's going to be very difficult to bring in a new coach and a new GM into a situation where, everything's built around a player that you inherit. And then, if the Jets had fired Saleh and Douglas after last offseason, and look, I was in favor of it because I think they both, their job performances has merited a change. But it would have been tough to do that and bring back Rodgers as the focal point of the team, because now you're bringing in a new coach and a new GM where they're not, they can't really, they have to wait a year to institute their vision. So, I think these guys are all tied together. And I don't think there's going to be a change in season because, like, let's say the Jets get off like a 1-3, 1-4 start. I mean, who takes over for Saleh? Is Nathaniel Hackett going to say this? Nathaniel Hackett was one of the worst head coaches in NFL history. I mean, do you promote Jeff Ulbrich? I mean, the defensive coordinator, maybe, but I mean, what's the evidence that Ulbrich would be better than Saleh? So I think that the Jets are going to stick with this crew through this season. Now, after this season, that's a different question. And, Rodgers has mentioned he wants to play a couple more years, but of course he's going to say that. I think anytime, and it's not about Rodgers. I think anytime a player is 40 years old, it's year to year. We don't know how this year is going to go. The Jets have a good season. Let's say the Jets have a good season and maybe they get to the AFC Championship game and they lose an overtime game to Cincinnati or Kansas City or Buffalo or somebody like that. It feels like you're really close. I think Rodgers comes back for 2025. If the Jets win the Super Bowl, I think Rodgers probably retires and rides off into the sunset, and then everybody, the coach and the GM, get a contract extension. If it's a bad season, if it's a season where the Jets fall short of expectations, there's a good chance Rodgers retires. It's almost certain that Douglas and Saleh are gone because, look, Robert Saleh has been here 3 years and not made the playoffs. I mean, I can't think of many coaches who survived 3 straight three straight playoff-less seasons. In fact, the only one that comes to mind for me is Tom Coughlin with the Giants. And this was after Tom Coughlin won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants. Robert Saleh hasn't had a winning season. And Douglas came to New York with a lot of fanfare in 2019. And while he's done good things, like the 2022 draft class is the best Jets draft class since at least 2006, maybe since 2000. Maybe we could go back further. It hasn't been all bad for Douglas. He's better than Mike McCagnon. He's better than John Idzik. But he has been nowhere near as good as he was advertised. He was advertised as like the next Ozzie Newsome, and he has not even come close to being that. These are good. The coach and the GM, I think, are lucky to still be here right now, if we're just talking solely about their job performance. So I think it's difficult to see if this doesn't go well, then they're almost certainly fired. But I think that comes at the end of the season. I think that, the Jets are going to play the season out with the crew they've got, because there's not really I don't think there's anybody who can fix what's wrong. If we're talking about firing Douglas in the season, that's almost pointless because the team's already built. Douglas did his job. And if we're talking about firing Saleh in season, again, who's going to replace him that's going to be better? I don't know that there's anybody that could do that. They could do that with. So I think that they're all here for one more year at least. If things go well, they could be here for much longer. If they don't, they'll be gone after the season. But I think it's going to take the full season.
Yeah, I know you mentioned Coughlin too. I think the thing that's also concerning with Coughlin, besides 2 Super Bowls, that he was also the last head coaching hire Wellington Mara. Coughlin was his guy, so there was a little bit of resistance in the organization to let him go. There was no such devotion with Robert Saleh being hired by Christopher Johnson and Woody Johnson.
That is an outstanding point. I hadn't even thought of that. That's an outstanding point. Again, that just shows you how lucky Robert Saleh is to be here right now after 3 straight playoff-less seasons. It's very rare. It's very rare. I mean, Saleh's done a good job building the defense, but there's not. We'll see what he can do. In fairness to Saleh, he hasn't had a quarterback yet. This year he's got a quarterback. He's got to win.
Yeah, that's for sure, John. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to keep up your Jets coverage. How can they do that?
Locked On Jets, available on all platforms and ganggreennation.com.
All right, John. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike.